Hey y'all, my name is JR Garza, and today we're going to be learning about the evolution of schooling. So our objectives for today are to, number one, identify the three eras of the early history of schooling. Number two, summarize how schooling has changed over time. And number three, explain the foundations of modern schooling that came from each era. So our outline today, we're going to look at the evolution of schooling, which includes non-Western education and Western education, education in the Middle Ages and transition, which includes the Dark Ages, the revival of learning and education in transition, and the educational awakening, which includes the Age of Reason and the emergence of common man. So to begin with the evolution of schooling, early human education was informal education, and it was passed down through the ages by all peoples on all continents except for Africa. And what was taught ranges from survival skills to how to act in society. And this was the only form of education available before written language. And so next we go to non-Western education, which began around 2000 BCE after the formation of written language. And this is where we see the first formal education, and we see the first schools, first textbooks, the first universities, and these arose in Mesopotamia and also in China. Um, and Western education wouldn't begin until 500 BCE, and it was centered in Greece and then shifted to Rome and was spread by Rome. So Western education, big focus here, very important. Greece and Rome important in their own ways. Um, so Greece is sort of known as like the cradle of Western civilization, Western philosophy, Western education, and democracy itself. So there's sort of a juxtaposition here between Athens and Sparta. Sparta, very militaristic, military education, brave warriors, um, no type of intellectual or aesthetic education, which was the hallmark of Athens. Um, and Athenian society and Athenian culture. This arose out of the age of Pericles, which was a period in Greek history in which sufficient great strides were made in human achievement to generate an organized concern for formal education. And the three foundational Western philosophers and educators are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who all taught each other. And Socrates and his namesake, the Socratic method, are important. The Socratic method is a way of teaching that centers on the use of questions by the teacher to lead students to a certain conclusion. Socrates believed that knowledge is virtue. Plato believed in the ideal society, and he believed that education was virtue. And Aristotle was more scientific, practical, and objective than the previous two. And he was later a major influence on the Middle Ages. So Rome was the successor to Greece, conquered Greece, and the educational and philosophical advances made by the Romans were often inspired by enslaved Greeks and the adoption of Greek culture. Out of Rome, we see the Latin grammar school, an early type of school that emphasized the study of Latin, literature, history, mathematics, music, and dialectics. A Roman figure during this time, known as Quintilian, emphasized studying, testing, debate, and reward for students. So Rome spread education and knowledge throughout the ancient world, in Europe and North Africa and the Levant, although, of course, they did this through violence and subjugation. Um, so next we turn to the Dark Ages. Sorry, uh, which saw power politically and educationally shift from the Roman Empire after its collapse to the Catholic Church in Western Europe. Um, so it wasn't actually dark, but it's perceived that way because of the relatively slow educational advancement. Um, but for example, the Eastern world actually thrived during the Dark Ages, with the founder of Islam, Muhammad, led a group of Arabs, captured northern Africa and Spain, and the Eastern learning that the Arabs brought to Spain, known as Al-Andalus, spread slowly throughout Europe and over the next few centuries, contributed to Western knowledge greatly, which included significant advances in science and mathematics, and the Arabic numbering system that we use today, which replaced the Romans' Latin system. Charlemagne was a major figure of this time who conquered most of what was once the Western Roman Empire. And in his empire, there was mainly religious schools of various types. His chief educational advisor was known as Alcuin. And during this time, there was an idea that circulating known as the seven liberal arts, which was a medieval curriculum that consisted of the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, logic, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Next, we go to the revival of learning, which sees education gaining momentum. So Thomas Aquinas pretty much single-handedly changes the church's views on learning, and he brings new learning institutions. Um, he brings out this idea of harmonizing the doctrines of the church with the doctrines of philosophy and education, which was rooted in the ideas of Aristotle. And he practiced scholasticism, which is the logical and philosophical study of the beliefs of the church. Um, Medieval universities, which are the true forerunners of our modern universities, were established during this time, including the University of Paris in 1180, which at that time specialized in theology. Um, so next we see education in transition. Um, this, of course, begins with the Renaissance. So the Renaissance started in Italy around 1300, when people reacquired the spirit of free inquiry that had once existed in ancient Greece. The Renaissance slowly spread throughout Europe, resulting in a great revival of classical learning, which was called humanism. And this went against the Catholic Church's rigid doctrine that had been so dominant. Um, some two major figures during this era were De Felter, who believed that people could be educated and be Christian at the same time, and Erasmus, who formed a humanistic theory of education. Next came the Reformation, which challenged the dominance of the Catholic Church over society and individual life, which cannot be stressed enough how dominant the Catholic Church really was. Historians suggest that the Pope and other church officials were in some ways more powerful than many individual kings and queens during that time. So Martin Luther starts the Protestant Reformation uh, with his disagreements with the Catholic Church. This leads to education becoming more important for all people so that they might read and interpret the Bible for themselves, not just to take the church's word for it. So this fostered like discussion, learning of Latin, and reading of the Bible. And also John Locke, who viewed a young child's mind as a blank state on which an education could be imprinted. So he believed that teachers needed to create a non-threatening learning environment, which was a revolutionary idea at the time. And the first public school in America was founded in 1635 in Boston. Um, that's cool. The educational awakening comes next, and our current educational ideas begin to take form with the Age of Reason, which is the beginning of the modern period of education, a period in which European thinkers emphasized the importance of reason. These thinkers were known as rationalists and included Descartes and Voltaire. Um, these ideas influenced Frederick the Great, who was the king of Prussia, and in his kingdom, which was very liberal for the day, allowed free speech, an increased degree of liberty, and they even passed laws regarding education, which require teachers to obtain special training as well as licenses to teach, which is still a thing today, as we know. Um, so next came the emergence of common man, which was a period during which the idea developed that common people should receive at least a basic education as a means to a better life. During this period, important people were Rousseau and Herbart. So Rousseau believed that education must be a natural process, not an artificial one. And his compassionate, positive view of the child was a different viewpoint. And Herbart contributed the Herbartian teaching method, which is an organized teaching method based on the principles of a predecessor, Pestalozzi, who stressed learning by association and consists of 5 steps, which are preparation, presentation, association, generalization, and application. Um, Also during this time, Napoleon the First of France, he implemented the lycées. So he believed that primary education should be in the hands of the clergy, but secondary education should be religion free. So in 1802, he passed a law setting up 45 lycées, which are basically French state secondary schools. and educated French children in Greek, Latin, rhetoric, logic, ethics, mathematics, and physics. So students followed a mandatory program of courses, and teachers sought to create patriotic and loyal future leaders. Some of his original lycees are still among the best schools in France, and these ideas were exported to Spain and the Netherlands during his time ruling over those countries. Um, so this is our recap of everything that we learned and the three eras that we learned about on the main ideas. Our question is, how would you explain the role religion had on the evolution of schooling? And here's my bibliography. And thank you.